Hi, welcome to segment 4 on our video related to Realism and Impressionism. In this video, we're going to be looking at the work of the sculptor Rodin. He was a French sculptor, and most of his work is towards the end or late 19th century. And while he's not classified as an impressionist, he definitely has that sensibility where you can see his hand work in the way he sculpted his figures. And so here are some examples. Some of you have probably seen some of these. The Thinker in particular is a very famous statue by him, as well as the Kiss. So Rodin is generally considered sort of the father of modern sculpture. He did not set out to rebel against the past. He was schooled traditionally and took a craftsman-like approach to his work and desired academic recognition, although he was never accepted into Paris's foremost school of art. Sculpturally, Rodin possessed a unique ability to model a complex, turbulent, deeply pocketed surface in clay. Many of his most notable sculptures were roundly criticized routinely criticized during his lifetime. They clashed with predominant figurative sculptural traditions in which works were more decorative, formulaic, and highly thematic. Rodin's most original work departed from the traditional themes of mythology and allegory. So in similar ways, he was like the realist and the impressionist in terms of his subject matter. And he really did model the human body with realism and celebrated individual character and physicality of people. Rodin was sensitive to the controversy surrounding his work, but refused to change his style. Successive works brought increasing favor from the government and the artistic community. For the unexpected realism of his first major figures, inspired by his 1875 trip to Italy, the unconventional memorials whose commissions he later sought, Rodin's reputation grew such that he became the preeminent French sculptor of his time. By 1900, he was a world-renowned artist. Wealthy private clients sought Rodin's work after his World Fair exhibit, and he kept the company with a variety of very high-profile intellectual and artists. He married his lifelong companion, Rose Bourret, in the last years of both their lives. His sculptures did suffer a decline in popularity after his death in 1917, but within a few decades his legacy solidified, and Rodin remains one of the few sculptors widely known outside of the visual arts community. And there's a whole slew of Rodin sculptures located at the North Carolina Museum of Art. I think there is some controversy in terms of those might have been actually cast after his death, so they come from the original molds that Rodin created, but I believe some of those are thought to have been done after his death. So anyway, but they're worth going to check out, and we will take a trip to the North Carolina Museum of Art soon, and after you take your AP exam, and look at some of these works, because they do have a fantastic collection. This is an example of one of his works and one of his most famous pieces. It's referred to as the Gates of Hell. It's a monumental sculptural group work that depicts scenes from the Inferno, and this is from Dante's Divine Comedy. It stands about 6 meters high, 4 meters wide, and 1 meter deep. It contains about 180 figures. The figures range from 15 centimeters or 6 inches high up to more than 1 meter, 3 feet high. Several of the figures were also cast independently by Rodin. So you can see some of these, like this is a really famous one. This trio up here has been cast individually. I think you can see the Thinker as well. The sculpture was commissioned by the Director of Fine Arts in 1880 and was meant to be delivered in 1885. Rodin would continue to work on and off on this project for 37 years until his death in 1917. The director asked for an inviting entrance to the planned decorative arts museum, with the theme being left to Rodin's selection. Even before this commission, Rodin had developed sketches of some of Dante's characters based on his admiration for the work of literature. The Decorative Arts Museum was never built. Rodin worked on this project on the ground floor of the Hotel Béron near the end of his life, and Rodin donated sculptures, drawings, and reproduction rights to the French government. In 1919, 2 years after his death, the Hotel Byron, I think that's how you say it, B-I-R-O-N, became the Musée Rodin, the Museum of Rodin, and housed this cast of The Gates of Hell and other related works. So it really is quite monumental. This is the work that we're going to be focusing on. It's referred to as the Burghers of Calais. It was completed between 1884 through 89. So in 1885, Rodin was commissioned by the French city of Calais to create a sculpture that commemorated the heroism of Attouché de Saint-Pierre, a prominent citizen of Calais, during the dreadful 100 Years' War between England and France that had started in 1337. So when we look at the composition, we see 6 men covered only in simple layers of tattered clothing, very sack-like cloth. Their bodies appear thin and malnourished, with bones and joints clearly visible. Each man is a burgher, or a city councilman of Calais, and each has their own stance and identifiable features. However, while they may stand together with a sense of familiarity, none of them are making eye contact with each other. Some figures have their heads bowed or their faces obscured by raised hands, while others try to stand tall with their eyes gazing into the distance. They are drawn together not through physical or verbal contact, but by their slumped shoulders, bare feet, and expressions of utter anguish. So, as a reference, Rodin tried to recount the work of Jean Froissart, a 14th century French chronicler who wrote about the war. And according to his notes, King Edward III made a deal with the citizens of Calais. If they wished to save their lives in their beloved city, then not only must they surrender the keys to the city, but 6 prominent members of the city council must volunteer to give up their lives. The leader of the group was Attouché de Saint-Pierre, who Rodin depicted with a bowed head and a bearded face, towards the middle of the gathering. To St. Pierre's left, with his mouth closed in a tight line and carrying a giant set of keys, is Jean d'Adair. So here's the figure. That was a detail we just looked at, and I think this is the figure of Jean d'Adair. I think that's how you say it. The remaining men are identified as come on. As André de Andrés, Jean de Finesse, and Pierre and Jacques de Wissant. And so these were council members and citizens of Calais. So when you look at this detail of Attouché de Saint-Pierre, I really do think you can see sort of the hand, and this is very different than the sort of subtractive sculpture that we see with artists like Michelangelo carving. It definitely has this look of clay and sort of modeling and melding, and very different than some of the other sculptures that we've looked at. Look at the whole composition again, and you really do. You see, you see the hand really in terms of how Rodin modeled the clay, and it is very expressionistic, I think, compared to sort of the marble sculptures that have been carved out of marble. Again, this was cast. The cast was molded in clay, and then bronze, or some material was poured into it, and so it definitely has a different aesthetic. unbeknownst to the six burghers at the time of their departure, their lives would eventually be spared. However, here Rodin made the decision to capture these men not when they are finally released, but in the moment that they gather to leave the city to go to their deaths. Instead of depicting the elation of the victory, the threat of death is very real, and it's much more real. Furthermore, Rodin sketched his composition in a circle, causing no one man to be the focal point, which allows the sculpture to be viewed in the round from multiple perspectives with no clear leader. Rodin spent most of his young life looking for approval and recognition. He was denied entry into the prestigious School of Fine Arts in Paris 3 times, and yet he continued to push forward until he could finally gain professional recognition. So imagine his delight in 1885 when he was asked to create a monument for Calais. The only problem was he wanted to do it in his own way. What you're looking at is another monument that Rodin did in 1891 through 97. And so it was common in the 19th century to depict an event with a single heroic figure. And so this is what Rodin did in his example here, the monument of Balzac, where the French playwright and novelist Henri de Balzac is shown standing tall and alone with his head held high. This is similar to what the city of Calais was expecting from Rodin. As a result, they were very displeased with Rodin's concept. They wanted only one statue, the one of Estouché de Saint-Pierre, but instead Rodin included all 6 men that were from the Froissart's account. And so they were displeased with this. They had sort of expected something different. So let's look at some details. So while the 6 men at first glance may look fragile, the heavy rhythmic drapery that hangs from their shoulders falls to the ground like lead weights, anchoring them and creating a mass of strong, unyielding bodies. In fact, the fabric appears to almost fuse to the ground, as you can see from this view, conveying the conflict between the men's desire to leave and the need to save their city. Rodin included raised portions of the floor under the men's feet, which would have ultimately made some of the men appear higher than others. Yet they are all sculpted to be around the same height than that of an adult male. The burghers were not meant to be viewed in the form of a hierarchical pyramid with Estouché de Saint-Pierre at the top, which would have been typical in a multifigural statue, but as a group equal in status. So this was something unusual and probably something that the city of Calais did not like. By bringing these men down to street level, Rodin allowed the viewer to easily look up into the men's faces, mere inches from his or her own, enhancing the personal connection between the viewer and the 6 men. So again, this was something that the city, probably didn't understand. They wanted this to be on a pedestal. They wanted it to be high and for people to look up towards it. But Rodin had a different way that he wanted the viewer to interact and participate in viewing his piece, and one that was more intimate. And here's a view where you can sort of see, you can, and you do see the variations in height just a little bit, but it is meant to be viewed from different viewpoints. It's meant to be walked around. And again, they do have these very distinct expressions of grief. In particular, this one's my favorite. I love that hand. So, throughout his career, Rodin did take risks and created work out of his own ideas, and some of them were unconventional. And as a result, he did set standards for artists who came after him. And eventually, this monument became one of his most well-known and studied works of art. All right, so that finishes our segment on Realism and Impressionism, and then, obviously late 19th century sculpture, and, we studied Rodin. Our next segment is going to deal with post-impressionism, so stay tuned for that. As usual, if you could please review the Khan Academy videos, in your folder that go with each of these units, that would be amazing. If you haven't done so, please start doing that. Anyway, thank you for listening.